Now, other than the Jessica Chambers trial is, of course, the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court by President Trump. Here to continue discussing that situation is Law & Crime's chief investigative reporter, Brian Ross. Brian, I know you've been digging into this ever since those explosive hearings and probably a lot longer before then as well.
Right, and some new developments today. Over the weekend, Democrats expressed concern that the FBI investigation, which everyone had agreed would take place, was going to be very limited and, in fact, was being controlled by either the Senate Republicans or the White House, with limitations put on who they could talk to and what kind of questions they could ask. Today, President Trump said, and the White House said, there are no limitations as to who they can talk to or what they can ask, but it has to be done by the end of this week.
That seems to be a big reversal, because one of the criticisms that really did stick was that this investigation could not be thorough, with a time limit on it and with limitations on who could and could not be interviewed.
Exactly. In fact, some Democrats were calling it a farce, and they said, we never agreed to this. They did agree to the time limit, but they thought there would be no limits on the FBI's ability to raise questions with anybody about any subject, in particular this thorny issue of whether Brett Kavanaugh lied. Not so much his past behavior, but whether he's currently lying about it, and in particular the questions that came up over his drinking and what was said in his yearbook, his own listing there about the keg club, 100 kegs or bust, had he blacked out. And this, of course, led a lot of different questions during the hearing about the drinking that seemed somewhat superfluous, but the point was, had he lied about them?
Now gloves off for investigators. They'll be able to go at this, but there still is the timeline on the investigation. We're going to listen now to a quick clip of two key senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is Senator Chris Coons and Senator Jeff Flake over the weekend on 60 Minutes.
Well, when he walked out, and you could see him open his binder and put his paper here, and we knew that he was eager to testify. And I have to say that when I heard him, I heard someone who I hope I would sound like if I had been unjustly accused. And to see his family behind him, as Chris said, and it was anger. But if I were unjustly accused, that's how I would feel as well. And I as it went on, I think his interaction with some of the members was a little too sharp. But the statement at the beginning, I thought, was pretty raw, but in keeping with someone who had been unjustly accused.
He had exchanges with Senator Feinstein, with Senator Klobuchar, with others that I thought went over a line. He was clearly belligerent, aggressive, angry, and I thought there was a tough dynamic there. As I watched him, part of me thought, this is a man who believes that he did nothing wrong and he's completely unjustly accused and he's being railroaded and he's furious about it. There were some lines that he delivered that were sharper, more partisan, more, this is the Clintons paying me back. This is a Democratic smear campaign. That I was surprised, struck to hear from a judicial nominee. I'm not at all surprised to hear that from other colleagues in the committee or on television, but I was really struck that I thought his anger got the best of him and he made a partisan argument that would have been best left to be made for his advocacy.
One Republican, one Democrat appearing this weekend on 60 Minutes to talk about what went down in those explosive Senate Judiciary Committee hearings last week. We're going to bring Andrew Bringuel into the discussion right now here on the Law & Crime Network. He's a former FBI agent. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you.
So what do you make of this, Andrew? We have an FBI investigation where apparently investigators can go wherever the leads take them, but the clock is still ticking.
Yeah, well, the clock has ticked in the past. I mean, there is a precedent with the Anita Hill investigation, which the Bureau did in 3 days. So in this particular case, they're given a supplemental directive to look at the allegations in 1 week's time. We have to keep in mind that this is not a classic single-scope background investigation. This is an anomaly in the sense that we typically don't do a background. I say the FBI typically doesn't do a background on constitutional officers, including Supreme Court nominees.
One question I would ask of you, Andrew. In the previous background checks that Kavanaugh underwent, he was never asked about anything before the age of 18. Is that correct?
That's a good point, Brian. Yeah, so typically in a single scope background investigation, as a new employee, there are different tiers, of course, but typically it's 10 years in the outset. And then once you're an employee of the federal government with a clearance, it's every 5 years they do a reinvestigation. But even with the 10-year scope, it doesn't go back past your 18th birthday or earlier than your 18th birthday. So these allegations being made at age 16 and 17 would have been outside the normal scope of an SSBI.
So then they're going to look at that now. Will they come up with a conclusion? What will they do in terms of trying to corroborate or not corroborate the allegations made by Professor Ford?
Also, a good question. I think you have to look at what's the intent. Senate looks at these nominees in terms of advice and consent. So they're looking at two things. They're looking at competencies of the jurist, and then they're looking at three particular things found in a typical background, and that's trustworthiness, candor, and character. So the question shifts a little bit after the testimony of last week in terms of, was he candid? Was there a lack of candor? Was he telling the truth and the whole truth? As we know, Andrew McCabe was fired for a lack of candor. So it really depends on what the Senate needs from the FBI in terms of the supplemental investigation. Are they looking for evidence of the assault, or are they looking for any inconsistencies in his testimony that would show a lack of candor and impugn his character as a jurist for the rest of his life?
You say lack of candor. He was under oath. Does this include a possible investigation into perjury?
Well, this is an administrative inquiry. So the FBI doesn't have subpoena powers as they pursue this supplemental investigation. But if, in fact, it shifts, and it could, to a criminal investigation, then there would be subpoena powers, and they might look for perjury issues in that investigation.
We're going to continue this discussion in just a couple of minutes here on Law and Crime. We're going to listen now to some of the combative discussions that happened during that actual Senate hearing last week. This is Senator Dick Durbin and Democrats questioning Judge Kavanaugh. Let's listen.
Judge,
and I called for a hearing immediately.
If there is no truth to her charges, the FBI investigation will show that. Are you afraid that they might not?
Come on, Jay Whip.
The FBI does not reach. That's a phony question because the FBI doesn't reach conclusions. They just provide the 302s.
Well, we hear from the witnesses, but the FBI isn't interviewing them and isn't giving us any facts. So all we have.
You're interviewing me. You're interviewing me. You're doing it, Senator. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're doing it. That's there's no conclusions reached.
And what you're saying, if I understand it, is that the allegations by Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and Ms. Swetnick are wrong.
Yeah, that is emphatically what I'm saying. Emphatically. The Swetnick thing is a joke. That is a farce.
You're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
Okay.
In your yearbook, you talked about drinking and sexual exploits. Did you not?
Senator, let me take a step back and explain high school. I was number one in the class. Freshman.
And I thought
no.
I thought only the Senate.
You got this up. I'm gonna talk about my high school. No. I'm gonna
let him answer.
I'm gonna talk about my high school record. If you're gonna sit here and mock me,
Judge Kavanaugh really going at it with Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont right at the tail end of that discussion. Look, Brian Ross, this got combative. It got nasty. The senators on the Democratic side of the aisle accusing Judge Kavanaugh of not answering the questions.
Well, of being belligerent, and it raised questions in the minds of some about his judicial temperament. What kind of a justice would he be if he is that kind of person, in sort of like a Jekyll and Hyde personality, which was widely mocked this weekend in a great skit on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, this thing got a lot of clicks online as well as in the broadcast, so if you weren't up late to watch it, watch a little bit of it now.
from the monsters on this committee makes me want to puke, and not from beer. Dr. Ford has no evidence, none. Meanwhile, I've got these. I've got these calendars. These beautiful, creepy calendars. I'm not backing down, you sons of bitches. I don't know the meaning of the word stop. To quote my hero, Clint Eastwood's character in Gran Torino, get the hell off my lawn. Now let's...
Matt Damon on Saturday Night Live, you know, is truth stranger than politics? I guess that's the question. The whole skit's online if you'd like to watch it in case you missed it on Saturday. Look, parody is the name of the game there. But let's move on to the more serious questions of the judge's temperament and how that plays into how the various senators are reviewing him. Constitutional law professor Stephen Wermiel is on the line with us here. Professor, what do you make of the situation here with Judge Kavanaugh and the way that he was fighting back with those senators? Is it the kind of judge that litigators and Americans want to have on the highest bench in the land?
I think he went too far. I think you have to draw a distinction in the way his comments went. Clearly, I guess he had a right to be angry at the way he was being attacked, but accusing this of being a conspiracy to get even for his investigation of the Clintons or a Democratic conspiracy, I think was way beyond what any judge ought ever to do in any setting, and I think that's going to raise real concerns.
Professor, let me ask you a question. And first, full disclosure, you are the husband of one of our colleagues here at the Law and Crime Network, Rhonda Schwartz. Do you believe he would fit into the court with this kind of belligerence and clearly a partisanship?
You know, the court is very adaptable. They all get along with each other. This will be a hard one for them to just openly embrace and accept. But Clarence Thomas fit in. He gets along with his colleagues, including the women on the bench. And I think Kavanaugh would eventually take his place. I think the Chief Justice would make every effort to make him feel like he belongs. But it's going to take some work. I think it would take some effort.
It would take work. It would take effort. There are a lot of moving parts to this. But, you know, beyond the belligerence, beyond the persona, there were some comments in there about, you know, kind of bringing this back at Democrats. I mean, do we want to have a judge on the bench who is looking to exact some kind of retribution for people who harshly questioned his record?
I think that's very problematic. I think that it will affect his credibility and cause people to question his judgment and his integrity for a long time to come. That said, if he's confirmed, he's a justice, and you know, he gets to do the job like the other 8. There will be people who will question whether they should listen to him or pay attention to him, but if he's got the seat, he's got the seat.
Steve, you covered the Supreme Court for the Wall Street Journal for 12 years. What do you make of the coverage of this judicial fight?
I've never seen anything like it, and I covered the Bork fight in 1987 and was teaching about the Supreme Court during the Clarence Thomas fight in 1991. This is just quite remarkable. It's more divisive about the court than I have ever seen anything be in the 50 years that I've been paying attention. And there's more coverage, I think, of every detail and every aspect. It's going to be hard to go back. It's going to be hard to have the next nomination be something that we might call normal. You know, I don't know what normal is anymore.
Professor, you're a member of the Board of Governors of the American Bar Association, which had asked for an FBI investigation after giving a full recommendation of Judge Kavanaugh. Have they changed their position now?
They have not backed down on the report they made, which found him well qualified. There's no process that I know of by which they in the past have gone back and withdrawn, changed their recommendation. There's a report that in 2006 when he was being considered for the Federal Appeals Court. I guess they'll have to wait and see what the FBI report says. They could always reconsider and downgrade the recommendation.
This has been a great discussion about the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, where the investigation goes from here, with the news this afternoon that the FBI will be able to look everywhere it wants, but that the timetable is still set. It has to be done in a week. I want to thank our guests and also Law and Crime Chief Investigative Reporter Brian Ross for the updates.
Absolutely.
We're going to be back after this quick break with more in the Jessica Chambers case.